let me begin by saying that I sort of take it as read. I fully agree with both my colleagues who've said that there is a very large component of public service in the business of news. And that very definition of public service suppresses the commercial returns that you can honestly expect from a business. So it's not purely a business. And therefore, the return on equity, etc., I mean, can never be the driving motive. But I just want to make a couple of additional points. As I said, please take everything as read. I mean, I fully endorse and agree with everything. The news business has to be viable if it has to survive. It cannot run on charity. It cannot run on donations alone. And the way, therefore, I have looked at this, the news operation or news businesses, that while all that has been set up until now, it really is applicable on hardcore political news. Hardcore political news is by far the most impactful, by far gets the most audiences, and by far the least profitable. But you'll have to build, if you want to keep it viable, you will have to build a constellation of news-related businesses around, and therefore current affairs, therefore deep verticals, health, business. Business is a particularly, I wouldn't still call it lucrative, but it's certainly the return on equity is much better in business journalism than in political journalism. And then I also believe that to keep the business viable, you will have to look at a portfolio of assets, media assets. Once again, because of cross-subsidy. I mean, it's a known thing that political news operations are cross-subsidized by other business verticals or super niche content verticals, indeed entertainment verticals, in a diversified media company. So I think all those things are a given. Unless you choose to be a super sort of vertical player in a very small area. Then, of course, you can continue to survive. But if you wish for your general news business to be viable, you simply have to build a lot of other media assets which are far more commercially viable around it. And that alone allows you to keep your news business free. Because if the news business loses its credibility, then frankly, that's the only currency you have. You may, for a couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even 7, 8 years, thrive on a diminishing credibility, but your end is written. There's no question of your being able to do it. So the way we've looked upon the last 30 years of building a news business is that the hardcore political news business honestly makes very little money. But to keep it independent and to keep it viable, you have to build a constellation of businesses around it which can cross-subsidize it.
So before I come to Samir, so the question that we started with is there a business in news media? So the sense I'm getting from almost all of you is that there is no business in news media.
No, I think that again would be a very facile...
Or an extreme...
Yeah, that would be... Because what the news business gives you, let's look at the positives. It gives you the kind of credibility and impact that I don't think an entertainment business can ever give you. Therefore, it gives you a connect with a very large audience which believes and trusts you. So the kind of, sort of, for the lack of anything else, the brand credibility that you build around a media business. I mean, a Time Warner is a large business, but if you ask someone and say, what do you know about Time Warner, you'll say CNN. So CNN may not be making as much money as the film franchises make, but it gets them the kind of credibility, reach, impact. So if you start valuing that intangible, then I don't think you can say it's not a business.
Okay. Businesses, companies could and do put pressure on media organizations, particularly if something unpleasant comes up. On the other hand, the same businesses and companies also are owning media assets, TV18 being one example where it was bought by Reliance. How is this going to evolve in your mind, and where are we headed?
Well, I think on the bit about pressures, I think organizations have to make their own calls. If you're the sort of person who says, listen, I'm prepared to lose a bit of business, but what the heck, then I think people stop troubling you. and then the core value of your audience and your brand gets monetized. So having said that, you know, nothing is ever 0-1 in life, so you do end up balancing things out, but you don't end up making a fundamental compromise. And I think if that reputation develops, people don't reach out to you. So I'd be honest, I've had very little pressure in the 25 years that we've done what we've done. And the second question that you had was?
So that's the ownership.
Yes.
And on the other hand, yeah.
Yeah, so now that, you know, I think I can speak much more for the television news industry, because I think the television news industry suffers from an extremely draconian rule, which doesn't apply either to digital ownership, and not yet. I mean, there's talk of it being brought into digital as well, but as yet it doesn't. And certainly doesn't apply to the newspaper industry. But in television, they have this very draconian rule that says that a single largest Indian shareholder has to have 51%. Now, that simply means that it's impossible for a first-generation entrepreneur to survive. I have no qualms in saying that I would have still been in Network 18 if this rule wasn't there. I had to exit only because of this rule. There was no other reason. I have no qualms in saying that if Prannoy is facing pressure in NDTV, it's entirely because of this 51% rule. So first-generation entrepreneurs have been, what can I say, eliminated from India's television news business, simply because of this extremely draconian rule. So either you stay very small, one channel, and therefore you can, you know, manage the 51%. But the minute you want to become a larger network, you can't. So I think television has to be treated very different from the others.
Okay. Samir, you want
I was going to ask a follow-up question. So this 51% might be worth explaining to everyone, and also do you think there should be, this 51% might be worth explaining, and also do you think there should be limits on non-media companies owning media assets of large?
Well, I think, you know, the latter question becomes a bit of a problem to implement, right? Because there are such creative corporate structures that can evolve, that you cannot have a situation where you can really go back and trace the capital all the way back. So you can't. So I think you live in a practical world. So I think big capital will come and own media assets. Right. That's a given. The two critical things here are in the 51% rule, for instance, and I must have fought 15 years with the government, that what is it in the broadcast license that you've got? You want control to stay in the hands of one single shareholder, right? You want control. Why are you defining it as 51% ownership? Right. Control and ownership are two very, very different things. You can give us non-voting shares. You can give us a million other ways of ensuring control. But why do you want to conflate ownership with control? But for 15 years, I must say, I fought and I had to then throw in the towel because no one in Shastri Bhavan was willing to understand this little thing. If you are in the news business, then you are in the news business for a very peculiar reason, that you want to be there. Otherwise, the same capital deployed in real estate would get you a hell of a lot more money. So you're doing it because you want to be there. And one of the requirements of being there is the ability to take pressure. That'll come. You capitulate to it. I can assure you that over a period of time, your brand will die. Yes, it may have a spike. We are seeing that with some TV channels right now. You're seeing a spike, a government-supported spike. But those are temporary things. Those never last across generations. So my point is, yes, it's a business, but it's a business you've chosen to be in. And the reason is that you want to do it. And therefore, pressure is a part of the game. You've got to learn to stand up to it. Digital is disrupting the news and information business completely. One thing is clear, that a few years down the road, whether it's 5, it's 7, it's 9 or 10, I don't know, the one who runs a good digital business will be the eventual winner. And will win big, no question about it. Just as newspapers a century ago won big, just as television about half a century ago won big, the ones who were running those well. Digital will win big, but it's very disruptive. You'll have to go through a lot of pain. You'll have to put in a lot of capital, and success is not guaranteed. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also extremely circumspect that this is a challenge, you know, you're building a whole new edifice, a digital edifice, on old businesses. The ones who get it right will go on to be very strong. A lot of them will, as Samir said, will find niches and then become very powerful in their niches. But if you want to build a large, all-encompassing brand, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be exciting, but a challenge.